It started as a whisper, a flicker in a field of static, dismissed at first as camera noise. But when NASA's solar monitoring network picked up the same anomaly from 3 different instruments, the room went silent. Because what they were looking at wasn't dust or plasma, or even light reflected from the sun. It was movement, controlled, rhythmic, and erupting outward from the core of 3I Atlas itself. Tonight, the interstellar object that was supposed to be just another comet is doing something no comet has ever done before. It's erupting in precise geometric bursts, as though something inside it has awakened. And before we go deeper, if you enjoy unravelling these real-time cosmic mysteries as they unfold, hit that subscribe button and share where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one ends, because by the time you finish this video, 3I Atlas might not be what you think it is anymore. For weeks, astronomers have been tracking its path as it nears its closest approach to the Sun, the moment of maximum stress, when most comets begin to fracture, venting ice and dust into space. But 3I Atlas didn't fracture, it pulsed. Infrared sensors picked up heat waves moving outward in patterns, like the rings a stone makes in water, repeating every 11 minutes. Then, high-resolution images from the Solar Dynamics Observatory revealed something no one was ready for. Perfectly circular plumes, 3 of them, ejecting simultaneously from equidistant points on its surface. Each burst released material in exact synchrony, as if following a command. One NASA researcher described it bluntly. It's not random outgassing, it's coordination. And that word, coordination, changed everything. Because comets don't coordinate. They react, they melt, fracture, and disintegrate. But 3I Atlas is responding like it's adjusting, recalibrating itself in real time. The ejections appear to stabilize its spin, even steering it against the expected gravitational curve. The result? It's not losing momentum, it's gaining it. Every known model fails to explain this. Every assumption about its nature is collapsing. Scientists are calling this the eruption phase. But inside NASA, the term being whispered is something else entirely, the ignition, because the new data shows that these eruptions are not releasing random debris. They're structured, ejecting mineral particles that reflect light in an unusually narrow wavelength band. A signal, and it's repeating. Across all instruments, from Earth-based telescopes to the Parker Solar Probe, the same flickering pattern appears, a pulse encoded in bursts of light, cycling at regular intervals as if something inside 3I Atlas is trying to communicate. At this point, some scientists stopped calling it a comet altogether, because if it's natural, it's rewriting physics, and if it's not, it's revealing something far bigger. When the data first came in, it looked like static, faint arcs flickering around 3I Atlas's nucleus, vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. But when analysts slowed down the feed and stacked the frames, something emerged that froze the room. The plumes weren't random jets of gas. They were shaping something. Each burst, each eruption followed a trajectory, arcing outward, then folding back in as if assembling a faint geometric shell. Within hours, the shape became clear, a perfect hexagonal halo expanding outward from the comet's surface. No natural process in comet physics can produce something like this. Hexagonal symmetry requires coordination, feedback, timing, and intelligence. At first, NASA described it as an optical artifact, but optical artifacts don't persist across multiple instruments, and they definitely don't expand in perfect proportion over time. Within 48 hours, images from the ESA's solar orbiter confirmed it. 3I Atlas was surrounded by a rotating structure made of light and dust, 6 glowing arcs orbiting its nucleus like the petals of a mechanical flower. And here's where it gets strange. As the halo expanded, its edges began reflecting solar radiation differently, as though it wasn't made of gas or dust at all, but of particles arranged with purpose. The light coming off it wasn't scattered randomly, it was modulated, encoded, forming a rhythmic pattern that repeated every 21 seconds. A pulse, a signature, something deliberate. NASA's internal name for the event leaked days later. Project Halo. Publicly, they said they were studying thermal dynamics in high-radiation comets. Privately, however, documents hinted at something far less conventional. In one leaked exchange between mission analysts, A researcher described the data like this: it's behaving as though it's building something, and that something seems to be adapting to the sun. That line alone sparked one of the most intense debates in modern astronomy. Because if that's true, if the halo around 3I Atlas is more than a plume, it suggests a kind of self-regulating behavior, a feedback mechanism capable of converting solar energy into motion, essentially propulsion. The halo isn't merely orbiting, it's spinning faster, and every time it spins, the nucleus stabilizes, as if the structure is protecting it, cooling it, or transforming it for what comes next. Several independent observatories tried to verify the data, but most found themselves locked out of the official telemetry feeds within hours. NASA's response? A brief statement. Certain observational windows are currently under review. That's the agency's way of saying, we saw something we can't explain, and we're not ready to talk about it. But the silence didn't stop the leaks. A private astrophotographer in Chile, part of the same network that first spotted Oumuamua years ago, captured what might be the most shocking image of all. It showed 3I Atlas's halo not as a circle, but as a hexagon of pure light, each edge flickering with its own internal pulse. And here's where it gets even more impossible. That same image revealed faint connecting lines between the arcs, a lattice-like structure, almost invisible, weaving through space like threads of energy. When enhanced, those lines formed a distinct pattern, not random, not chaotic, but mathematical. Ratios that matched those found in atomic resonance. The same golden proportions seen in spiral galaxies and organic life. 3I Atlas wasn't disintegrating, it was transforming. Dr. Mira Salazar, an independent astrophysicist from Madrid, described it this way in an unverified transcript. We're witnessing a phase transition, a conversion from one state of matter to another, triggered by solar proximity. It's as if the object is absorbing information from sunlight and reorganizing itself accordingly. Others went further. A small team within JPL proposed a radical idea. What if the so-called eruptions aren't outgassing at all, but signaling events? A way for the object to announce its presence, or respond to something waiting beyond the heliosphere. After all, 3I Atlas isn't alone. V1 Borisov, the first known interstellar comet, follows a path eerily similar to 3I Atlas's. Different years, different angles, same signature elements. Two separate visitors, two anomalies, one strange symmetry. Now, as 3I Atlas erupts in rhythmic pulses, the timing between its bursts and Borisov's last known flare aligned to within seconds. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe we're watching two objects separated by years and billions of kilometers communicate. Inside NASA, that's the question no one wants to ask publicly. Are these interstellar visitors part of something larger? A network? A sequence? A message being transmitted not to us, but through us? Because the light from 3I Atlas's eruptions isn't just beautiful, it's consistent. Each burst follows a pattern, a slow rise, a sharp pulse, then a decay curve that mirrors human-made digital encoding. You can't call that natural coincidence. You can only call it information. And that's exactly what several deep space observatories began to find when they analysed the light. Hidden within the photometric data, buried under the noise, was a recurring pattern of intervals that matched binary code. When decoded, the output wasn't words or coordinates, but frequency alignments. Frequencies that correspond to resonances in hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, the very elements that form life. It's almost poetic. The message of 3I Atlas might not be a message in language, but in chemistry. A universal signal saying, this is what we're made of, and maybe you are too. By the end of this week, every major observatory, from Hawaii to Chile to the Webb telescope itself, will be focused on 3I Atlas. If the halo continues expanding at its current rate, by the time it reaches its aphelion, the light structure could be larger than Jupiter, but what happens after that is anyone's guess. Some models predict collapse, that the halo will implode once the object cools, leaving nothing but dust. Others suggest it might stabilize into a fixed orbit, a kind of artificial ring glowing faintly in the void. And then there are the ones who think this is only the beginning, that we're watching the construction of something we can't yet define, something that might not be meant for us at all. Even among the skeptics, one fact remains: 3I Atlas is breaking every rule of celestial mechanics. Every image, Every measurement, every pulse of light screams the same thing. This is not random. Whatever it is doing, it's doing it on purpose. And as NASA quietly closes off access to live feeds, independent astronomers are racing to preserve every frame they can before the next data blackout. Because if 3I Atlas keeps accelerating, and if the eruptions continue at this rate, something extraordinary is about to happen. Something we've never seen before in the history of astronomy. At first, everyone thought the halo would fade. Dust disperses, light weakens. That's the natural way of things. But 3I Atlas didn't fade. It refined. The luminous hexagon that once looked soft and gaseous has hardened into lines. Sharper, cleaner, almost architectural. Spectral analysis now shows distinct layers. An inner ring rich in metallic silicates, a middle band of charged carbon dust, and an outer shell emitting in narrow ultraviolet bands. The same range used in deep space communications. That's when the radio telescopes began to hear it. Across 3 continents, observatories reported identical anomalies. Faint, repeating blips, pulsing every 21 seconds. The exact period of 3I Atlas's light bursts. At first it was dismissed as background interference, but then the pattern started modulating. Every time the comet's brightness surged, the radio tone shifted fractionally upward, as if the light itself were tuning the frequency. NASA's Deep Space Network registered it first. Then Arecibo's successor in Puerto Rico confirmed it. The signal wasn't random, it was synchronized, like a heartbeat echoing through multiple instruments. Inside JPL, someone whispered a comparison that quickly leaked online. It's behaving like an antenna, a resonant cavity using the sun as its power source, an antenna powered by a star. The idea sounds impossible, but the math is there. As the halo spins, its charged dust and metallic filaments cut across the solar wind, generating a current. Each eruption from the nucleus amplifies that current, releasing controlled bursts of electromagnetic energy, the same way an old radio transmitter modulates its carrier wave, except this one spans millions of kilometers, and it isn't broadcasting toward Earth, it's broadcasting through us. The beam aligns not with our planet, but with a fixed point far beyond the solar system, a coordinate near the star Epsilon Eridani. That's the same region from which the Breakthrough Listen project once detected unexplained narrowband signals years ago. Now, those frequencies are active again. It's as if 3I Atlas arrived, charged itself on sunlight, and began calling home. But what truly unsettled astronomers was the precision. Each burst of radiation corresponds perfectly with the comet's rotation and its orbital corrections. Subtle deviations that can't be explained by gravity or solar pressure. It's steering. The trajectory adjustments are microscopic, but consistent, guiding it onto a new path that will eventually cross the plane of Earth's orbit. Not collide, but align. According to one analyst, if you projected its course forward, it passes directly through the point where Earth will be in 6 months. Not a crash trajectory, more like a rendezvous. The word rendezvous made it into the draft of an internal memo before being quietly edited out. The revision called it an observational alignment event, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. Around this time, the James Webb Telescope captured a sequence that has not yet been released publicly. Sources describe it as unlike anything ever recorded. Concentric ripples of plasma extending from the halo, each one shaped like a standing wave, expanding, freezing, then collapsing back into the object. Imagine a breathing sphere of light the size of a planet, inhaling and exhaling solar energy. The intensity is increasing exponentially. If the current trend continues, within days 3I Atlas's output could exceed the total radio emissions of Jupiter. So the question is shifting from what it's doing to why. Some astrophysicists are leaning toward a radical but testable hypothesis. 3I Atlas and the newly observed V1 Borisov are part of a pairing sequence. 2 synchronized nodes in a larger interstellar network. Each uses stellar energy to relay or amplify signals between systems. In other words, these comets might be interstellar relays, autonomous, self-repairing beacons seeded across the galaxy. It sounds like science fiction, but so did Oumuamua, until it wasn't. When Avi Loeb's team compared the energy curve of 3I Atlas to Oumuamua's earlier acceleration pattern, the overlap was almost exact. Different eras, same physics, same unexplainable propulsion. And now, a new variable, communication. If these objects are relays, then the halo we're seeing is the equivalent of a dish unfolding, a light-based transmission lattice, powered by a star and activated only at perihelion, which means every time one of these visitors swings near a sun, it wakes up, just long enough to say something or listen. In Houston, mission planners are quietly debating whether to redirect the next solar probe to intercept the emissions. The risks are obvious. No one knows what would happen if human hardware entered that field of energy. The radiation levels alone are beyond safe margins, but the opportunity, the chance to read, record, or even decode the signal, is impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers have begun to notice something strange. Images captured from ground-based telescopes show small, flickering objects trailing 3i Atlas, tiny points moving in formation, maintaining equal spacing. Dust fragments? Maybe, except they don't drift or disperse. They hold their positions like escort satellites. Each one glows faintly in the same narrow ultraviolet band as the halo itself. If that's coincidence, it's the most disciplined coincidence in cosmic history. And through all of this, NASA remains silent. The public feed from the Solar Dynamics Observatory was cut for recalibration. Archived images vanished from open databases within hours. Even the Minor Planet database now lists 3i Atlas's brightness as unavailable pending verification. When agencies stop showing data, it usually means one thing. They've seen something they can't explain, and they need time to decide how to explain it. But time might be running out. The latest light curve analysis suggests the eruptions are increasing in both frequency and precision. Every pulse grows shorter, stronger, cleaner, as though 3i Atlas is reaching some kind of final calibration, and once it's fully tuned, nobody knows what happens next. By the end of this week, we may witness the completion of whatever this process is, the alignment of two interstellar objects, pulsing in harmony across light years, exchanging signals we can barely detect. If it's natural, it's a miracle of physics. If it's not, then we're standing in the middle of someone else's experiment. Stay until the very end, because by the time this event peaks, the night sky could light up with a signal not meant for us, yet impossible to ignore. For 3 days straight, the data feeds have been a blur of light and numbers. Every few minutes, 3i Atlas erupts again, 6 synchronized bursts, expanding into the solar wind like petals of fire. But now, something's different. The halo isn't brightening anymore, it's resonating. Spectrographs show the light waves folding over one another, interference patterns stacking in perfect ratios, a standing resonance spreading through the inner solar system. In Chile, one observatory described it like a bell that refuses to stop ringing, and here's where everything begins to cross a line. At 03:14 UTC, the Deep Space Network's Canberra dish registered a brief but unmistakable anomaly, a low-frequency pulse travelling through the solar wind itself, propagating faster than any solar flare could. It carried a distinct modulation, 3 spikes, then 1 long decay. Hours later, the same pattern appeared again, this time detected by radio telescopes in South Africa and Hawaii. The source, somewhere near 3i Atlas. But the signal wasn't outgoing, it was incoming. Whatever the halo had become, an antenna, a resonator, a living machine, it had just received a reply. The first thought was solar interference. But solar interference doesn't repeat itself every 6 hours with the precision of a metronome. The signal strengthened, shifted, and then locked to a frequency known intimately to anyone who studies Earth's magnetosphere. 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, our planet's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. That's when NASA's monitors started glitching. Magnetometers in orbit flickered as though echoing a faint vibration that wasn't supposed to be there. And in one sequence, lasting just 2 minutes, the background noise across every sensor dropped to near zero. Total electromagnetic silence, before returning with a pulse perfectly synchronized to Earth's own field. 3i Atlas wasn't just erupting, it was mirroring us. Inside Mission Control, the conversation was split between disbelief and terror. How does an interstellar object, a supposed chunk of rock and ice, suddenly begin transmitting on a frequency that matches Earth's global resonance? What mechanism could possibly tune itself so precisely unless it was designed to? One analyst in a leaked transcript described the data like this: "It's as if the signal recognized us. It locked onto the only universal rhythm we broadcast. In other words, our planet's pulse." By day 4, amateur stations around the world began picking up faint, rhythmic static on shortwave bands. Listeners described it as a breathing tone, cycling every 8 seconds. Most dismissed it as atmospheric distortion, but when recordings were overlaid with the official data from 3i Atlas, they aligned perfectly. Every radio in the world, it seemed, was hearing the same heartbeat, and then came the image. From the Solar Orbiter's ultraviolet camera, one of the few feeds still accessible, analysts noticed a momentary flash, a lattice of blue-white lines forming across the halo, converging into a single luminous symbol before dispersing. It lasted less than a second, but frame-by-frame enhancement revealed geometry almost identical to magnetic field maps of Earth. The implication is staggering. In that brief instant, 3i Atlas appeared to project an echo of our own planet's magnetic contour, a kind of mirror signature carved in light. Coincidence? Unlikely. This wasn't random chaos frozen in a photograph. It was recognition. Within hours, NASA locked down every feed. The official explanation cited solar interference events. But internal documents labelled the frame sequence Image 42, Reflection Anomaly. Only one line of text accompanied it. Source and intent unknown. Proceed with containment protocol. Containment of light. And then, on the 5th night, the eruption stopped. Silence. No radio bursts. No light pulses. No movement. 3i Atlas now drifts in absolute stillness, a faint metallic shell glinting against the sun, as if the object, having finished whatever it came to do, powered down. But the aftermath is everywhere. Earth's ionosphere is subtly different. Global measurements show a 0.04% shift in baseline resonance. It's minuscule, harmless, but real. Our planet's natural pulse is no longer quite the same. So what happened? No one can say for certain. Some theorists believe 3i Atlas was never a comet at all, but a seed relay, part of a distributed network that activates whenever it encounters intelligent resonance. In that model, Earth's electromagnetic rhythm served as a handshake protocol, a way to identify life capable of listening. Once received, the object recorded and retransmitted our planetary fingerprint across the stars, then shut itself down. Others insist it's pure coincidence, an optical illusion layered over human imagination. But even they can't explain why 2 interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and 3i Atlas, both defied physics, both accelerated, and both left us staring into a silence that feels deliberate. If 3i Atlas truly sent something, it's already gone, racing across the void at light speed, carrying the imprint of our magnetic heartbeat into the deep dark between stars. And somewhere out there, perhaps, something capable of hearing it will know we're here. Or maybe it already did. Because before the final blackout, the last spectrographic frame recorded a single, almost imperceptible flicker, a binary sequence hidden in the tail's ultraviolet decay. When decoded, it translated to 3 simple frequency markers. Together, they formed coordinates, not to another star, but to us. Latitude 0 degrim, longitude 0 degrim to us, the point in the Atlantic where Earth's magnetic field converges to near zero. The same place where, historically, navigation goes blind, the middle of the planet's quietest ocean, and that's where this story ends, for now. A motionless object near the sun, an echo of our own magnetic rhythm imprinted in light, and a faint message that seems to point home. Maybe it's all coincidence, a cosmic mirror reflecting our need to find meaning in chaos. Or maybe the universe just answered in the only language we both understand, vibration. Either way, by the time you finish this video, the pulse of our world will still be humming, slightly altered, forever entangled with something that crossed half a galaxy to find it. Stay curious, because the story of 3i Atlas isn't over. It's only waiting for the next one to wake up. For 12 hours after the final eruption, space was silent. Every observatory, every satellite, every amateur telescope turned toward the fading light of 3i Atlas and found nothing moving. Just a static halo of particles frozen mid-spin, glowing faintly in wavelengths that shouldn't even be visible anymore. It looked like an aftermath, like the residue of something that had finished its purpose and gone still. But then, the the glow began to change. At first it dimmed, then it deepened, from white to amber, from amber to crimson, until the halo resembled a vast, slowly turning ember, suspended in space. Spectral analysis showed something that shouldn't exist in a vacuum: temperature increase. The object wasn't cooling, it was heating up. Thermal data showed internal temperatures climbing by several degrees every hour, far beyond what solar radiation could account for. No known material could sustain that kind of internal rise without vaporizing. Yet 3i Atlas held steady, as if the heat wasn't destroying it, but transforming it. Across NASA's Deep Space Network, instruments began to pick up a background hum, an ultra-low frequency tone barely above the threshold of detection. It pulsed once every 29 seconds, the same interval that had once defined its earlier binary signal. But now, the pattern wasn't light or radio. It was vibration, a kind of slow, deep resonance moving through the plasma field of space itself. The strange part? The pulse seemed to ignore distance. Whether recorded from the Parker Solar Probe or from ground-based observatories on Earth, the timing remained identical. No lag, no propagation delay. It was as if space itself was vibrating in unison. Dr. Arjun Patel, one of the astrophysicists still cleared for direct analysis, described it in a single sentence that leaked online within hours. It's like the solar system is humming. Within a day, magnetometers around Earth began to respond. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but subtly. Measurements taken from satellites in low orbit showed the planet's magnetic field oscillating in near synchrony with the deep space signal. Something millions of kilometers away was resonating with Earth itself. At first, no one believed it. But when the European Space Agency cross-checked the data, the correlation held. Every peak of the 29-second pulse aligned with a microscopic variation in the geomagnetic field. A mirror response. 3i Atlas had found a rhythm, and somehow Earth was keeping time with it. For several days, scientists worked around the clock to model what was happening. The best hypothesis suggested that the object's halo, now fully ionized, was interacting with the solar wind in a way that induced long-range magnetic coupling. In simpler terms, it had created a kind of resonant bridge, a standing wave connecting it to nearby, magnetic fields, and Earth, being one of the strongest and most complex magnetic bodies in the inner solar system, had become a natural anchor point. The effect was small, harmless, but persistent. The pulse didn't fade, it strengthened. Every 29 seconds, the same invisible vibration rippled through space, from the sun through the heliosphere to our planet's magnetic core. It was steady, constant, and, most unnervingly, intelligent. Because after 72 hours, the timing began to shift. The interval shortened. 29 seconds became 28, then 27. By the fifth day, it had reached 25, and each change coincided with a corresponding adjustment in the object's light curve. 3i Atlas wasn't just resonating, it was responding. To what, no one knew. Some theorized it was synchronizing with the sun's rotation. Others thought it was reacting to Earth's magnetic harmonics. But one group, a small off-record team within the Aurora Initiative, suggested something else entirely. They noticed that the frequency shifts matched another pattern, one found not in astronomy, but in biology. Specifically, the resting electrical rhythm of the human brain, the same oscillations recorded during states of deep focus and REM sleep. If true, that meant the pulse wasn't just coupling with Earth's field, it was resonating with the living systems inside it, and that's when the human reports began. Around the world, in isolated regions with low electromagnetic interference, mountain observatories, ocean vessels, remote research stations, people began describing a strange sensation at regular intervals, a momentary warmth, a pulse behind the eyes, a flicker of light in the mind's periphery. It lasted less than a second each time, perfectly matching the rhythm of the 3i Atlas signal. It wasn't constant. Only when the object flared in the solar wind did it seem to reach across that impossible distance. No one called it supernatural. Not yet. But the connection between biological response and cosmic pulse was undeniable. Something in deep space was touching the rhythm of human consciousness itself. When word of this correlation reached the public, NASA went silent. For 48 hours, every live solar feed, every official image, every field report vanished behind the label "Data Under Review." Independent scientists were told to pause analysis pending verification of systemic interference. It was the same kind of blackout that had preceded every major discovery tied to this object since its detection. The pattern was clear. Every time 3i Atlas behaved in ways that blurred the line between natural and artificial, the world went dark. And when the feeds came back online, as they always did, the data had been scrubbed, flattened, normalized. But this time, one image slipped through. A sequence taken by a private observatory in New Zealand showed something that couldn't be dismissed as lens flare or compression. For exactly 3 frames, the halo around 3i Atlas glowed in a distinct formation. A ring within a ring, concentric, like a ripple in a perfect pond. And in the centre, a single, stable point of light. It didn't move, it didn't flicker, it just stared back. Some called it the eye, others called it the seed. Whatever it was, that image spread faster than any scientific paper ever could. Forums lit up with speculation that the object was observing, calibrating, or even listening. That its resonance with Earth wasn't random but purposeful. And that maybe the eruptions we'd seen weeks earlier weren't the beginning of destruction, but the beginning of communication. Because if 3i Atlas had really synchronized its rhythm with ours, if it had found the frequency that defines not just our planet but our minds, then the silence that followed wasn't absence, it was waiting for what comes next. By the time the 3i Atlas pulse stabilized, the effect on Earth's magnetic field was no longer theoretical, it was measurable. Instruments across the globe, from the USGS Geomagnetic Array in Alaska to the Kiruna Observatory in Sweden, all began reporting synchronized fluctuations in the ionosphere. At first, they were subtle, tiny, rhythmic variations in field strength. But as the hours passed, those variations grew stronger, clearer, and undeniably structured. The pattern wasn't random noise, it was order. Every cycle lasted precisely 24 minutes and 16 seconds, the same rotation interval recently recorded in 3i Atlas's halo spin. The solar wind wasn't just interacting with our planet, it was translating something through it. For the first time, Earth itself was acting like a receiver, and the signal coming through didn't behave like a typical cosmic pulse. It carried modulation, it carried data. When researchers converted the variations into an audio waveform, the result didn't sound like static or interference, it sounded like language, a rising tone, a long pause, then a descending echo, like a question and an answer, repeated endlessly. At first, NASA dismissed it as a harmonic between the Van Allen belts and the solar wind, but independent labs quickly disproved that. The waveform's precision, down to the millisecond, didn't match any known solar or magnetic resonance. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't repeating Earth's own signal either. It was creating something new. One astrophysicist, who asked to remain anonymous, described it this way: "It's like listening to a heartbeat learning to talk." Then came the power anomalies. Across parts of the Pacific Rim, electrical grids began experiencing brief coordinated surges, small, harmless, but perfectly timed with the new pulse. In Tokyo, security cameras flickered, simultaneously for 3 seconds. In Chile, a radio telescope array recorded identical distortions at the exact same moment. And in Iceland, auroras appeared in skies that should have been quiet, forming complex spirals unlike any known geomagnetic storm pattern. It wasn't random chaos, it was synchronization, across hemispheres, across systems, across everything conductive. The more they analyzed, the more impossible it became to explain. The frequency of the pulse, the same one linked to 3i Atlas, was now subtly encoded into the electromagnetic fabric of Earth itself. Something in space had managed to tune the planet. The European Space Agency quietly issued a technical alert, circulated only to partner agencies. It warned of a repeating resonance event of unidentified origin and recommended limiting satellite maneuvering until further analysis. But the public explanation was softer. Minor ionospheric disturbances due to solar activity. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that solar activity at the time was at its lowest point in years. The sun wasn't the cause was orbiting near it. Inside NASA, the internal tone shifted from curiosity to controlled panic. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory convened a midnight emergency briefing, attended by engineers, astrophysicists, and 2 behavioral analysts from the Department of Defense. What they discussed wasn't just physics anymore. The data logs from magnetospheric satellites showed a faint but distinct pattern overlay inside the pulse. 3 rising tones followed by a silence that lasted exactly 7.83 seconds. That number was chillingly familiar. It matched the Schumann resonance, Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, the one shared by every living thing on the planet. Somehow, 3i Atlas's signal had locked onto it, folded it, and begun replaying it, louder, clearer, amplified through the ionosphere. In one leaked report, a scientist described it bluntly. The object isn't transmitting toward us, it's transmitting through us. By now, it was no longer possible to separate natural from artificial behavior. The halo had stabilized into a thin, luminous shell, rotating steadily, emitting faint polarized light. Every 12 hours, a soft flare of radiation rippled through it, propagating across the heliosphere like a cosmic heartbeat. And Earth, whether by coincidence or connection, pulsed back. The effect wasn't limited to instruments anymore. Around the world, people began reporting strange sensations during the resonance peaks. A low hum in the air, pressure behind the eyes, dreams that felt lucid, synchronized, and vividly real. Hospitals recorded brief spikes in neural activity, increased REM cycles, sudden surges of coherence between brainwave patterns. One neurologist described his patients as broadcasting the same frequency. Even animals responded. Migratory birds, deviating from their paths, dolphins surfacing in unison far from their normal ranges, bees forming perfect geometric clusters near electromagnetic hotspots. It was as if every living organism was being swept into the same subtle rhythm, a planetary alignment of biology and field. NASA finally addressed the growing speculation with a short clinical statement. No evidence supports claims of a causal link between the observed solar resonance and biological phenomena. The agency continues to monitor the situation closely. But the wording, monitor closely, only deepened suspicion. Because, as leaked internal documents later confirmed, the agency had already classified the event under a new designation, phenomenon sigma, and one phrase appeared repeatedly in those reports: non-random correlation between cosmic resonance and cognitive coherence. In plain language, the human brain was reacting to something in deep space. As the world began to sense the hum, that low, ever-present vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the skies grew subtly brighter. Not dramatically, not enough to frighten anyone, just enough that nights felt thinner, as though the stars themselves were closer. Astronomers noticed the same effect, a faint amplification of background starlight, concentrated near the ecliptic plane. The light wasn't coming from the stars at all. It was scattering off an invisible field that stretched between the Sun and the orbit of 3i Atlas. The object hadn't just connected magnetically, it had connected optically, and that meant only one thing: information, light-based, structured, travelling across the bridge between star and planet, a direct link between 3i Atlas and Earth. Then came the moment no one could explain. For 7 seconds, every magnetometer, telescope, and ground-based receiver on the planet went blind. Complete data blackout, no error codes, no interference, just silence. And when the systems came back online, the readings showed one final pulse, a massive, clean burst of radiation that didn't fade into space. It folded. It collapsed inward, disappearing into the object's core. The halo dimmed. The hum stopped, and 3i Atlas, the interstellar visitor that had defied gravity, erupted like a star and synchronized with our planet's heartbeat, simply went dark. For days, astronomers waited for a flare, a signal, a sign. None came. But in the silence that followed, a new anomaly appeared, a faint reflection in the solar wind, a secondary echo, like the shadow of something vast and hidden, moving just beyond our detection range. Whether it's another fragment or another visitor, no one can say. But one line from a leaked NASA report says everything. If 3i Atlas established a resonance with Earth, that connection may not end simply because the source went dark. And maybe that's why, even now, some people swear they can still feel it, the faint rhythmic pulse beneath the noise of life. Not in their ears, but deep within the mind, steady as breath. the sound of something watching or waiting. For a while, everyone believed it was over. When 3i Atlas went dark, the hum that had rolled through the ionosphere faded with it. Instruments went quiet. Power fluctuations ceased. The planet exhaled. But silence in space is never final. It's only the breath between discoveries. 2 weeks later, a routine gravitational scan near Mars detected something strange. A faint but measurable distortion in the local field, as though a small, dense mass had materialized where none existed before. It wasn't debris, and it wasn't static. It was moving. Slowly, deliberately. At first, astronomers thought it might be a lost probe, an old relic drifting through interplanetary space. But its behavior didn't match any known object. It maintained a precise speed, an exact vector, and it was cold. Colder than the cosmic background itself. Then came the light. A faint flicker appeared along Mars's orbit, brief, periodic, like a reflection of sunlight off metal. But the reflection didn't behave like light glinting from a solid surface. It repeated at regular intervals, forming a pattern, 3 short flashes, 1 long, the same pulse sequence once recorded in 3i Atlas's halo. NASA dismissed it at first, a coincidence, an artifact, a cosmic mirror. But the European Space Agency's TGO orbiter confirmed the anomaly from Mars orbit. The flashes weren't optical illusions, they were emissions, faint bursts of polarized light emerging from a source smaller than a satellite, tracking just above the orbital plane. Within days, multiple observatories triangulated it. Whatever it wasn't drifting randomly. It was following the exact gravitational wake 3i Atlas had created during its flyby. Like a remnant retracing a memory. When the data was cross-checked with 3i Atlas's last known telemetry, the resemblance was undeniable. The new object's trajectory matched 3i Atlas's post-perihelion vector within fractions of a degree. The only difference, it was smaller, 1/10 the size, and far more stable. NASA's internal term for it was fragment sigma, but a few within the scientific community began using another name, the Echo. Because that's what it seemed to be. Not a survivor, not a new arrival, but a reflection of something that had already happened. A ghost in motion. Within a week, more echoes appeared. Not visible to the naked eye, not even in standard imaging, but in gravitational anomalies. Slight dips and surges in local field strength, scattered like breadcrumbs across the inner solar system. Each anomaly pulsed faintly in the same 29-second rhythm that once defined the 3i Atlas signal, and each appeared in perfect mathematical sequence, forming an expanding spiral pattern stretching outward from the Sun. It wasn't random, it was organized. Astronomers called it the lattice. To others, it looked like a transmission frozen in space, a physical waveform etched into gravity itself. As the pattern unfolded, it began to influence nearby matter. Asteroids passing through the lattice exhibited small, sudden course corrections, as though nudged by invisible pressure. Charged particles within the solar wind curved along new magnetic lines that hadn't existed before. Even the Sun's corona displayed faint symmetrical ripples during high-resolution imaging, waveforms echoing the same geometric ratios once observed around 3i Atlas. It was as if the solar system itself was remembering. The resonance had never truly ended. It had just changed form. The source was gone, but the imprint remained. When NASA's Parker Solar Probe transmitted its next data batch, analysts found something buried deep in the readings, a faint electromagnetic oscillation matching the shape of 3i Atlas's old binary signal. Only this time, the frequency was inverted. It wasn't sending outward, it was reflecting back. Somewhere between the Sun and Mars, space was replaying the last moments of 3i Atlas's eruption, not as light, but as memory. And the deeper scientists looked, the more they found this reflection encoded in unexpected places. Microwave background noise, cosmic ray distributions, even radio telescope calibration data. No matter where they searched, the pattern reappeared. Subtle, persistent, universal. It's as though 3i Atlas had written itself into the fabric of the solar system, a signature imprinted across every field and particle it had touched. And as weeks turned to months, the anomalies multiplied. In the asteroid belt, probes detected a slow oscillation in dust density, as if entire fields of debris were moving in sync with an invisible current. Near Jupiter, magnetometers recorded rhythmic fluctuations in the planet's massive magnetic field, subtle but undeniable, and on Earth, the Schumann resonance, the planet's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, began fluctuating again, this time with no measurable solar cause. A recurrence. The hum was back. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a steady pulse. It was a pattern. Short sequences repeating in triplets, each ending in a pause exactly 1.8 seconds long. When translated into binary, the sequence formed repeating intervals of 3 characters. 010. The same triplet pattern found in early radio code used by NASA's first deep space transmissions. It didn't make sense. No one had sent anything. Yet somehow, the universe was echoing humanity's own earliest language. That's when Dr. Leon Zhou, a physicist at Caltech, proposed the theory that split the scientific community in two. She suggested that the lattice forming in the solar system wasn't a message or a remnant. It was a response. "We didn't detect 3I Atlas," she said during a private lecture. "We activated it. The object didn't awaken because we found it. It awakened because we observed it." Her idea was simple but terrifying. That 3I Atlas was a kind of quantum seed, a structure that only completes itself when it's seen, when its existence is measured by consciousness, and that by studying it, we became part of its process. Suddenly, every anomaly took on new meaning. The hum, the resonance, the magnetic coupling. They weren't attacks or experiments, they were feedback, a reflection of our own attention bouncing through the medium of space. In Zhou's model, 3I Atlas wasn't built to transmit data, it was built to transmit awareness. "We're not observing an alien signal," she wrote in her notes. "We're observing our observation of it, magnified, looped, and reflected through space-time itself. If that's true, it means that the moment we noticed 3I Atlas, it noticed us back. Not through intelligence, but through physics. And what we're seeing now, the lattice, the echoes, the returning hum, may be the result of that interaction continuing long after the object went dark." NASA, of course, hasn't endorsed the theory. Officially, the anomalies remain under ongoing review. But off the record, several mission specialists admit there's something deeply unsettling about the precision of these phenomena, as if the universe itself is repeating what we once measured, over and over like a memory trying to keep itself alive. Because if 3I Atlas was truly part of something larger, if its disappearance triggered a network-wide cascade across interstellar space, then we might not be waiting for another visitor at all. The next one might already be here, not outside the solar system, not orbiting the sun, but hidden in the very fields that surround us, in the pulse of the Earth, in the flicker of the aurora, in the low hum that fills every silence. Weeks passed before anyone realized what the fragments were doing. At first, they seemed like scattered debris, harmless, drifting, meaningless. But when analysts compared their trajectories, something impossible appeared. Every echo fragment was moving not randomly, but in perfect geometric proportion. Their orbits were spacing themselves evenly, locked to precise harmonic distances measured from the sun. It wasn't scattering, it was alignment. And when you mapped those alignments on a 3D model of the solar system, a shape began to emerge. Not a spiral, not a ring. Something more deliberate, a structure built out of orbits themselves. It started as a lattice near Mars, tiny gravitational distortions, almost imperceptible, forming a hexagonal web. Then, over the course of days, faint magnetic ripples began to spread outward, connecting each point of distortion like invisible threads. By the end of the month, the entire region between Mars and Jupiter had changed. Charged particles from the solar wind began flowing differently through that sector, curving along new paths as though space itself had gained invisible architecture. And through that invisible geometry, one rhythm persisted, the same 29-second pulse that once defined 3I Atlas's heart. Only now, it was everywhere. NASA's first response was to call it a magnetohydrodynamic anomaly, but that didn't last, because the pattern was too perfect, too sustained, and most disturbingly it began to move. The web was drifting outward, expanding as though being stretched by something unseen. It wasn't energy dispersing, it was growth. The data from the Parker Solar Probe showed microscopic changes in plasma density forming along the same hexagonal lines traced by the anomalies. Each segment was identical in length, 1.618 astronomical units apart. The golden ratio, mathematics embedded in orbit. That was the moment when even the skeptics fell silent. Because now the lattice wasn't just visible in data, it was visible in light. Infrared cameras began to pick up faint glowing arcs stretching across millions of kilometers, ghostly filaments connecting nothing to nothing. They shimmered faintly, only for seconds at a time, as if caught between existence and imagination. But when the images were stacked, the arcs formed something real, a spiral of 6 layers, expanding through the solar plane. It was beautiful and terrifying. Dr. Elise Harding, an astrophysicist from the European Southern Observatory, described it best. We are watching architecture being built out of space itself. When her words leaked to the press, she was told to retract them, but by then it was too late. The story spread across scientific circles faster than any containment protocol could hold, because her next sentence was even worse. The structure isn't foreign to our physics. It's native. It's as if the solar system is folding itself into a new shape. In other words, 3i Atlas didn't bring this pattern, it activated it. As the lattice expanded, small gravitational shifts became noticeable. Nothing dangerous, just subtle, the kind of changes that shouldn't happen naturally. Orbital models for the inner planets began to deviate by tiny fractions. Radio signals travelling through deep space encountered phase distortions, as if something massive but invisible was bending the very medium through which they passed. And yet, no mass was detectable, no debris, no energy signature, just the geometry and the pulse, always the pulse. Somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, the data suggested a point of origin, a node where the distortions converged, a faint invisible hub of gravitational tension. When the James Webb Telescope finally focused on that region, the image it returned made the scientists in the control room fall silent, because there was something there, a small spherical object, no larger than a city, hovering inside the geometric network like the seed of an unfolding organism. It emitted no heat, no light, just a faint, steady vibration detectable only in deep infrared. Its pulse, 29 seconds, exactly the return of 3i Atlas, or perhaps what it had become. NASA denied it immediately. The official line described it as an instrumental reflection, a glitch caused by cosmic dust near the lens. But internal data files told another story, one stamped with the same classification that had followed this object from the beginning: Phenomenon Sigma. According to those reports, the seed object wasn't new. It had been forming slowly over time, coalescing from the lattice itself. In simple terms, the Webb had built it. Matter had gathered where geometry told it to, like a crystal growing along invisible lines of order, and now the crystal was alive with motion. Over the next several weeks, the seed expanded, not explosively, not violently, but rhythmically, layer by layer, each new shell forming in perfect harmonic sequence. By the time of the next solar observation window, the object's size had doubled. Spectral readings showed it reflecting sunlight in unique polarization, not like rock or ice, but like engineered surfaces designed to scatter radiation evenly. And inside that reflection, something stranger, a frequency signature identical to the background hum of Earth's magnetosphere. It wasn't just echoing the sun anymore, it was echoing us. That realization changed everything. Because if the lattice was truly resonating with planetary fields, and if the seed forming at its center was amplifying that resonance, then every planet in the solar system was now part of a single, synchronized structure. A machine made of orbits, a living network woven from gravity, magnetism, and light, and all of it born from one interstellar visitor that shouldn't have existed at all. Dr. Harding summarized it this way in a memo that was never meant to go public. 3i Atlas may have been a trigger, a catalyst for a transformation embedded in the solar system from the start. The planets, the fields, the orbits, they're behaving like components aligning in preparation for something. Perhaps not construction, perhaps activation. Her report was labelled speculative and redacted in later versions, but one line remained untouched. We are no longer just observers of the solar system, we are part of its awakening. By now, the public feeds were back under restriction. NASA's live observatories cut access due to calibration. The ESA stopped releasing telemetry for the Mars sector altogether, and yet amateur astronomers kept seeing it, the faint arcs of light, the shifting geometry, the rhythmic flashes in the night sky. No one could suppress what the sky itself was showing, and through it all that soft hum, not loud, not invasive, began to creep back into the silence of human consciousness. Quiet, steady, familiar. Like something ancient remembering how to breathe again. It began subtly, a flicker, a shimmer, a blink of light that lasted less than a heartbeat. Then again, 12 hours later. By the third repetition, every observatory trained on the Mars-Jupiter corridor confirmed it. The seed at the lattice's centre was no longer dormant. It was alive in its own strange way. The pulse that once defined 3i Atlas was back, but different now. Cleaner, stronger, refined. Every beat of light carried a structured signature, a rise, plateau, decay. Exactly like the waveform of a transmission. And it wasn't just emitting outward. For the first time, the pulses were being reflected back from multiple directions, from planets, from fields, from the sun itself, as if the entire solar system had become an array, working in perfect synchronization. Something was listening, something was answering. At first, it was impossible to tell where the responses came from, but spectral filtering revealed faint returns from multiple coordinates: Jupiter's magnetosphere, the orbit of Saturn, and the distant Kuiper belt. Each return followed a pattern, short bursts perfectly timed forming harmonic ratios. When plotted, they resembled a waveform, folding and unfolding like a cosmic heartbeat across billions of kilometers. The solar system was talking to itself. NASA's internal analysis compared the event to a phenomenon called resonant coupling, a process where separate systems, when tuned to the same frequency, begin to oscillate together without direct contact. It happens in pendulums, in circuits, in music, but never before on a scale this vast. The working theory was that the lattice, the network left behind by 3i Atlas, had effectively turned the solar system into a resonant cavity, a kind of interplanetary instrument amplifying energy between its magnetic poles. If true, it meant that whatever was happening now was no longer driven by an object. It was driven by the system itself, and the seed at its centre, that cold, silent sphere, was simply the conductor. Then came the first directional pulse. Unlike the steady heartbeat before, this one was sharp, concentrated, as if focusing through a lens. It pointed toward the outer solar system, cutting through the magnetic haze of Jupiter like a beam of invisible light. The pulse was accompanied by a measurable distortion in the interplanetary medium. Space itself seemed to ripple. Voyager 2, still transmitting faintly from the edge of the heliosphere, detected it almost immediately. The signal hit the probe's magnetometer in a perfect sine wave pattern, so clean, so deliberate, that it registered as artificial. NASA's Deep Space Network scrambled to verify it. Within hours, they confirmed. The seed had broadcast a pulse that travelled at light speed, carrying structured modulation for exactly 1.9 minutes before dissipating. The destination, interstellar space. When the data reached Caltech, Dr. Lian Zhou, the physicist who had once claimed observation itself activated 3i Atlas, reviewed the waveform and went silent. Her analysis was simple, but terrifying. It's not just a signal, it's an initiation. She explained that the pulse frequency matched the cosmic background spectrum within 1 part in a billion, an accuracy impossible by chance. In other words, it wasn't sending information through the universe, it was aligning itself with it. To her, the meaning was clear. The seed was syncing the solar system to the same baseline resonance that fills the entire cosmos. It wasn't trying to contact something out there, it was trying to become part of it. As the pulse sequence repeated, the outer planets began to respond in measurable ways. Jupiter's auroras brightened slightly, glowing with ultraviolet intensity not seen in decades. Saturn's rings vibrated with subtle photometric shifts, microscopic dust grains aligning briefly as though polarized by an unseen current. Even Neptune's magnetic field exhibited a fractional wobble, perfectly in sync with the seed's rhythm. No physical connection could explain it. Only resonance. Space was singing, and the planets were the instruments. When Voyager 2 transmitted the next dataset, the waveforms had changed again. The background cosmic radiation, once random noise, now displayed faint harmonic interference, like echoes bouncing through the void. To most, it was nothing but data. But to those watching closely, it meant one thing. The pulse hadn't stopped at the heliosphere. It had crossed the boundary and kept going. Something beyond our solar system was now vibrating with us. Back on Earth, subtle changes began to reappear. The Schumann resonance, the planet's electromagnetic heartbeat, began rising again, steadily but consistently. The hum that had vanished after 3i Atlas went dark returned, softer this time, but omnipresent. Not mechanical, not threatening. Just there, like the sound of an ocean heard through the walls of a dream. And for the first time, the pulse didn't fade when the sun set. It continued through the night, measurable even during quiet hours when the magnetosphere was most stable. To those sensitive enough to notice, it felt almost alive, like a rhythm waiting for something to answer. Across social media, people began to describe similar experiences, a vibration felt in deep sleep, dreams of glowing lattices suspended in blackness, the sound of wind where there was no wind. Most dismissed it as suggestion, mass psychology. But a few scientists, quietly off the record, began to wonder whether the resonance was reaching more than just magnetic fields, whether it was touching consciousness again. After all, if the human brain shares the same baseline frequency as Earth's natural resonance, and that resonance is now part of the cosmic hum, then maybe we're not just observers anymore, maybe we're participants. A private SETI researcher leaked a message on an encrypted forum, claiming his instruments picked up a reflection, a backscatter from interstellar space matching the outbound 3i Atlas pulse. The signal was weak, almost indistinguishable from background noise, but when amplified, it revealed a repeating triplet, 3 tones spaced at harmonic intervals, not random, not cosmic background, a reply. It came from approximately 11 light-hours away, just beyond the heliopause, where the sun's influence fades and the galaxy begins. No one could confirm it officially. But the implications were staggering. Whatever 3i Atlas had become, it had not only transmitted outward, it had received something back. At that point, NASA stopped releasing new data entirely. Live feeds from the Deep Space Network went offline. Even public mission dashboards showed maintenance in progress. But leaked logs revealed a single phrase repeated across multiple internal memos. Signal recursion detected, meaning the pulse was returning in loops, strengthening with every pass, as though the entire solar system had entered into resonance with something beyond it, something vast enough to reflect its own voice back across the void. And that's when the final image arrived. A long exposure shot from the Subaru telescope in Hawaii captured a faint luminous arc on the edge of the solar plane. At first, it looked like an artifact, a camera flare, a glitch. But when processed, it revealed a thin ring of light spanning hundreds of millions of kilometers, a boundary, a halo, the same formation seen around 3i Atlas before it erupted. Only this time, it didn't belong to a single object. It surrounded us, the entire solar system. That night, Dr. Joe wrote a final note in her logbook. 3i Atlas didn't visit. It prepared. It wasn't a message, a machine, or a warning. It was a mirror. And now, we're reflected. And somewhere out there, beyond the edge of sunlight, something flickered once. Not bright, not loud, just enough to remind us that the story wasn't ending. It was answering. It began, as always, with light. Not the blinding kind that overwhelms the senses, but a subtle shimmer, a soft distortion in the sunlight reaching Earth. For a few seconds at dawn, observatories across Europe recorded a faint spectral split, sunlight fracturing at wavelengths that shouldn't exist. At first, it seemed like atmospheric interference, but then it happened again and again. By the fourth occurrence, the anomaly was visible even to the naked eye, a barely perceptible hue, a colour no one could quite describe, flickering at the edge of perception like the afterimage of a dream. NASA called it a photometric aberration. But the instruments told another story. The sun's spectrum had changed. When the data came in, the difference was undeniable. The core fusion process was steady, unchanged, no temperature spikes, no irregular solar activity. Yet somehow the sun's light was being filtered. It wasn't getting dimmer. It was becoming structured, faintly polarized, carrying embedded frequency modulations invisible to human eyes, but unmistakable in data. Something was shaping sunlight into a carrier signal, and when the modulation pattern was analyzed, it matched the same harmonic ratios found in the 3i Atlas pulse. The lattice hadn't just reached the solar system, it had reached the sun. Inside NASA's Solar Dynamics lab, they began to whisper a new phrase, quietly, off the record, heliogenic encoding. It meant that the sun, the very heart of our system, was now part of the resonance network. The modulation in its light wasn't random. It followed a precise 29-second cycle, identical to the one that had defined 3i Atlas since its discovery. But there was one new variable. Every 7th pulse, the sun emitted a faint secondary frequency, slightly higher, slightly faster, like a harmonic overtone added to a song. It was almost musical. The first to notice the effect on Earth wasn't NASA. It was a team of climatologists in Norway studying solar radiation variants. They found that during these overtone cycles, atmospheric ionization increased by measurable amounts. Not dangerous, but definite. In layman's terms, the Earth's upper atmosphere was responding as though receiving a whisper from the sun, a whisper in rhythm with the pulse. And soon after, the auroras began to change. At first, they appeared normal, green and blue ribbons swirling across the poles. But as the pulse continued, those ribbons began to align, forming symmetrical arcs that mirrored the lattice geometry first seen near Mars. Then one night, for a few brief moments, the auroras stabilized, not as curtains of light, but as shapes. 6 perfect hexagons, stationary, unmoving. They glowed for exactly 29 seconds, then dissolved into the night. Hundreds of images were captured before official channels labeled them as camera malfunctions. But the symmetry was too precise to be an illusion. It was as if the auroras themselves were projecting the same cosmic architecture now spreading through the system. Meanwhile, instruments aboard the Parker Solar Probe detected something even stranger. The sun's corona, the outermost layer of its atmosphere, began oscillating at low amplitude, resonating with the same frequencies as the lattice field. The oscillation wasn't chaotic, it was ordered, controlled. When plotted on a graph, the oscillation revealed a perfect waveform pattern, the same structure as the binary pulse that once emanated from 3i Atlas. The implication was unthinkable. The sun was broadcasting, and the medium? Light itself. Dr. Joe, reviewing the new data from her lab, described it in the simplest possible terms. We're looking at the sun speaking in the language of physics. Her model suggested that 3i Atlas hadn't just triggered resonance within the solar system. It had reprogrammed the sun into a transceiver, a stellar-scale node in an interstellar network. And if the sun was transmitting, then whatever it was speaking to was vast. As days passed, subtle shifts began to ripple through the solar wind. Particle streams that once moved chaotically now flowed in rhythm, forming periodic waves. Each crest matched the 29-second pulse interval, and their amplitude grew with every cycle. Those streams reached Earth, embedding faint variations into the planet's magnetosphere. The same heartbeat-like fluctuations that had first appeared months earlier, now stronger than ever. The sun and Earth were in sync, not metaphorically, literally. Every electromagnetic oscillation, every radiation flux, every whisper of solar wind aligned into one harmonic pattern, stretching from the corona to the core of our planet. It was no longer a mystery of astronomy. It was a transformation of physics itself. When the European Space Agency compared the solar data to deep space readings from Voyager 2, they found something impossible. The background radiation beyond the heliopause, the boundary where our sun's influence ends, had changed too. It was no longer random cosmic noise. It had rhythm. The same triplet harmonic sequence, faint but perfect, now echoed in interstellar space. The pulse that began with 3i Atlas had crossed the threshold, and the galaxy had answered back. But here's where the data took a darker turn. As the sun synchronized with the lattice, Small but consistent distortions began appearing in the curvature of light passing through our solar system. Stars near the ecliptic plane started to shimmer with microlensing effects, faint warps in brightness that followed the pulse rhythm. That meant space itself, the vacuum, the geometry of reality, was oscillating. Not violently, but rhythmically, like a tide moving through the structure of space-time. If the Sun had truly become a node in a larger network, then our entire solar system was no longer isolated. It was connected, part of something much bigger, something that breathes. NASA's simulations offered two possibilities. The first was comforting, that the resonance would stabilize, fade, and the system would return to equilibrium. The second was harder to accept, that the lattice wasn't just transmitting energy. It was reconfiguring space itself. If that was true, then the very constants of physics within our system, the speed of light, gravity's pull, time's flow, could begin to shift, however slightly. And those shifts, while subtle, would cascade. The entire architecture of reality within our solar bubble would start to bend toward a new configuration. One we didn't design, one we didn't choose, one that might not include us at all. In a leaked recording from an internal NASA meeting, one voice, tired, quiet, unmistakably human, summed it up in a single line. We always looked for messages in the stars. Maybe the stars were the message. Because if 3i Atlas was truly designed, or evolved, to awaken this network, then it had succeeded. And now the Sun itself had become a transmitter, pulsing through space in a rhythm that might have begun long before we ever looked up. In the following weeks, telescopes observed an even greater anomaly, a faint but definite dimming of interstellar light across multiple constellations. Not extinction, not shadow, a pattern. It was as if the galaxy itself had begun to respond in kind, bending its light in synchronization with ours. For now, the pulse continues, measured, constant, reassuring even. But those who've studied it long enough say there's something different this time. A new overtone embedded deep within the rhythm. It isn't a signal, it isn't data, it's intention. It started quietly, with clocks, atomic clocks to be precise, the kind used in satellite synchronization, particle experiments, and deep space communication. Instruments so exact they lose only a single second every million years. But now, they were losing microseconds. Not everywhere, not evenly. Only when the solar pulse reached its 29-second peak. The first to notice was the European Space Operations Centre in Darmstadt. Their telemetry feed began drifting, a microscopic but consistent delay repeating every cycle. Then came confirmation from Japan, then Australia, then NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. Each clock, independent, isolated, geographically separated, slipped in perfect synchrony with the pulse. Time itself was stuttering. The effect wasn't dramatic. It didn't tear space apart or freeze moments mid-air. It was subtle, like the universe exhaling half a breath before remembering how to breathe again. But in physics, even a microsecond matters. The discrepancies accumulated across thousands of systems, creating wave-like ripples in synchronization data. The pattern wasn't random noise. It mirrored the solar resonance exactly, a temporal heartbeat echoing through every measurement system humanity had ever built. Time, the most stable construct we knew, was no longer consistent. It was oscillating. When the data reached Dr. Lian Zhou, she immediately understood what it meant. Her earlier theory, that 3i Atlas had linked observation and reality, suddenly had evidence. Because if time was shifting in measurable waves, that meant the framework of observation itself was being altered. Every living system, every conscious mind, every atom was now pulsing to the same rhythm. This isn't energy transmission, she said quietly. It's synchronization between physics and perception. In other words, the lattice wasn't just shaping light or magnetism, it was shaping awareness. Reports began to surface from across the world, small, anecdotal, but eerily consistent. People claiming moments of lost time, clocks appearing to pause for a heartbeat, dreams that felt longer than the minutes that contained them. Even airline pilots trained to disregard illusions began logging strange discrepancies, moments where time inside the cockpit seemed to stretch and compress with each pulse, though their instruments denied it. At first it sounded like mass delusion. But when EEG studies revealed brainwave fluctuations matching the same frequency as the solar hum, scientists had to admit something was happening. Something connecting the rhythm of the sun to the rhythm of the human mind. NASA called an emergency symposium, part scientific summit, part containment exercise. Representatives from CERN, the European Space Agency, the Royal Observatory, and even psychologists from the WHO joined under one unspoken purpose: to decide how much the world should know. Because if the resonance truly affected perception, then every human being was already inside the experiment. One psychologist compared it to a planetary hypnosis. Not control, not manipulation, but synchronization. A merging of consciousness into the background rhythm of the solar system itself. It sounded impossible, until the evidence began aligning. A group of neuroscientists from MIT published a classified report on what they called global neural coherence events. During each solar pulse, a measurable increase in cross-hemispheric synchronization occurred in test subjects, the two halves of the brain firing in almost perfect unison. Normally, this only happens in deep meditation, near-death experiences, or under certain psychedelic states. But now it was happening naturally, planet-wide, at the same 29-second intervals. And after each pulse, subjects reported strange sensations, clarity, déjà vu, and an unshakable feeling that they had remembered something ancient just for an instant. The data kept coming. Satellite telemetry, magnetospheric readings, even seismic activity began falling into rhythm. Earth itself was moving in the same 29-second wave. Every ocean current, every pressure pattern, every shifting of tectonic plates, subtly, imperceptibly, aligned to the hum. It wasn't catastrophic. It was elegant. The world was synchronizing not just in light, but in motion. Physics and biology were dancing to the same beat. And somewhere deep in the silence between those pulses, people began hearing it. A soft tone, felt rather than heard. Not music, not signal, something like recognition. When Dr. Joe saw the global neural data, she stopped calling it resonance. She called it awakening. 3i Atlas didn't bring consciousness, she wrote in her notes. It revealed that the universe already has it. We're simply tuning into it for the first time. Her conclusion terrified NASA's communications division. Because if the lattice truly linked awareness across matter, then even discussing it might amplify it. The decision was made. Public silence. All updates about the pulse, the solar oscillations and time dilation events were placed under sealed classification. But the public didn't need an announcement. They could feel it. Around the equinox, the phenomenon reached its strangest phase. During the strongest pulse window, GPS systems worldwide drifted by precisely 29 milliseconds. For a brief moment, the entire planet's coordinate systems lost their fix, not by error, but in sync. It was as though the planet itself had blinked, and in that blink, witnesses reported uncanny sensations, a sudden hush, colours sharpening, sounds warping slightly higher in pitch. Then, everything returned to normal, but for that one fraction of a second, reality itself felt thinner, closer. Back at Caltech, Joe's team began running correlation tests between the solar pulse and human brain activity on a global scale. The results were chilling. Every measurable aspect of human attention, reaction time, focus, even creativity, surged during the pulse peak. It was as though the pulse enhanced consciousness, and the more people paid attention to it, the stronger the global signal became. Observation wasn't passive anymore, it was participatory. The theory that emerged from this was staggering. The lattice, the hum, the resonance, none of it was an invasion. It was a mirror, a reflection of awareness echoing back through the physical world. And 3i Atlas, the object that began all of it, may have been nothing more than the ignition spark in a system designed to recognize itself. For the first time in history, the boundary between perception and physics was dissolving. Time, consciousness, and the structure of space were beginning to move as one, and the universe was waking up. Then came the first real anomaly. A deep space probe near Saturn recorded a massive distortion in its local space-time field. A ripple so precise, so localized it resembled a signature. 3 waves, pause, 1 long echo. The same sequence that had once defined 3i Atlas's light patterns before its eruption. Only now, it wasn't coming from an object. It was emanating from everywhere. Space itself had begun to remember the pulse, and each echo carried with it a fragment of something that scientists couldn't explain. Structured quantum data embedded within the background noise of reality. A message, written not in light or sound, but in the rhythm of existence itself. In her final briefing before being reassigned, Dr. Joe said something that no one could quite forget. If consciousness is just the universe observing itself, then maybe 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor at all. Maybe it was the universe, turning its gaze inward. And in that silence, she added one last thought. When the pulse completes, we might not be here to observe it, because we'll be inside it. By now, the hum had become part of life. Most people couldn't hear it anymore, or maybe they'd just stopped trying. It was everywhere, beneath the noise of cities buried inside static, pulsing faintly behind thought. The scientists still tracking it said it had stabilized, but stabilized wasn't the same as safe, because every time the pulse reached its 29-second crest, strange things started to happen. Not catastrophic, just wrong. It began with machines. Atomic clocks still slipped, but now the drift carried over into everything they touched. Computers froze for split seconds at exact intervals. Digital recordings gained imperceptible flickers, single-frame glitches that showed shapes no one could identify. And satellites, especially those in low Earth orbit, began losing synchronization as if time itself was stretching between beats. A pattern emerged. The closer a system's internal frequency matched the 29-second pulse, the more unstable it became. Anything operating near that rhythm, oscillators, heart monitors, sonar buoys, started to misbehave. And what frightened scientists most wasn't the chaos, it was the precision. The failures happened at perfectly regular intervals, like something was testing us, measuring, calibrating. At first, NASA's engineers thought the resonance was simply overloading electromagnetic systems. But then came a breakthrough, one that terrified even the skeptics. A group of quantum researchers at Fermilab recorded an anomaly inside their coherence chamber. Particles within the system began aligning spontaneously with the solar pulse, syncing their spin to the same rhythm. This shouldn't have been possible. The experiment was shielded, completely isolated from external fields. Yet somehow, the pulse was threading through space-time itself, bypassing every barrier we'd built. In one internal report, a physicist described it this way: "It's not interfering with quantum states, it's becoming them." For the first time, scientists admitted what many had already feared. The pulse wasn't energy passing through matter, it was reordering matter to its own timing. And then, the dream phenomena returned. Sleep labs in Finland and Chile began documenting a rise in synchronized REM cycles. Hundreds of volunteers entered deep sleep at the same moment, scattered across time zones, unaware of each other, all beginning and ending their dreams precisely at the crest of the solar hum. Inside those dreams, the patterns were eerily similar. Floating lattices, hexagonal lights suspended in blackness. A single vibration running through everything, warm and wordless, like memory. When they awoke, participants described the same phrase in their own languages. It wasn't a dream, it was remembering. As data accumulated, the pulse's effects became impossible to separate from daily life. Wireless communication grew less reliable. GPS mapping flickered. Seismic activity shifted into repeating rhythms, minor quakes that followed the same intervals as the cosmic heartbeat. The entire planet had become part of a single synchronized system, and every system, biological, digital, atomic, was gradually falling into harmony. By all measures, the lattice was nearly complete. The seed object beyond Mars, now hidden within a field of plasma, had stopped emitting its distinct light. Instead, it reflected the sun's pulses perfectly, amplifying them like a resonant chamber built from magnetism itself. But what was it building toward? Somewhere deep in NASA's data logs, the answer might already have been recorded. Weeks before communications went silent, one dataset from the Parker Solar Probe captured something extraordinary. A brief dip in solar output followed by a massive coordinated flare that didn't radiate outward. It folded inward, vanishing into itself. The waveform of that flare was unlike any seen before. When converted to audio, it wasn't chaotic noise. It sounded like rhythm, measured, intentional and layered, as if the sun was no longer burning at random but performing, and every instrument, from Mars to Earth, began echoing that same signal, repeating it, sustaining it. The sun had stopped being the source. It had become part of the composition. Dr. Zhou's last published entry was brief. "The lattice is complete," she wrote. "The hum is not interference, it's alignment, and alignment is never passive. It leads somewhere." She predicted a final phase, what she called the singular synchronization. In her notes, it was described as the moment when every resonant body within the system, every magnetic field, every planet, every consciousness, would converge at the same harmonic peak. It would begin, she said, as a compression of time. Days later, something subtle began happening across observatories. Images taken seconds apart began overlapping in impossible ways. Stars appeared slightly closer together. The light curves of variable stars shortened by fractions of a second, too consistent to be random. It was as though the fabric of time itself was tightening, 1 microsecond at a time, drawn inward toward an unseen center. Computers could still measure it, but human perception began to lag. People described moments that felt longer than they were, seconds stretching into minutes, thoughts lingering in midair. And those sensitive to the hum began to sense a new element hidden in its rhythm, something like acceleration. As the pulse cycle shortened, from 29 seconds to 27, then to 25, everything that had once been subtle became immediate. The sky itself seemed to shimmer. Colours deepened. Night and day began to blur at their edges. Sunlight carried faint harmonics, audible only in quiet rooms, like a song half remembered. Machines froze and unfroze as if keeping time with something unseen. And across the planet, people began describing the same phenomenon. That familiar heartbeat of the cosmos wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside clocks, inside circuits, inside thought, the rhythm of the sun, the rhythm of the universe, the rhythm of us. Government stayed silent, but small leaks continued to surface. Internal memos from the European Space Agency confirmed what everyone already suspected. Time dilation wasn't an anomaly, it was systemic. Every major celestial body within the solar system was experiencing synchronized phase contraction. One physicist put it bluntly: "We're being drawn into resonance. Space itself is beginning to hum." No one could predict what that meant. Would the system collapse? Would it merge with something larger? Or was this what 3i Atlas had always been preparing for? Not destruction, not invasion, but completion. As the pulse tightened, its intervals converged toward a single number. 1 second, 1 beat, 1 unbroken line. And then, for the first time in months, the hum stopped. Every magnetometer went flat. Every field went still. The world fell into absolute perfect silence. No vibration, no signal, nothing. And in that stillness, the stars above seemed to flicker, not like fire, but like memory replaying itself, over and over, waiting for something to begin again. The silence didn't last. It never does. After 6 hours of perfect stillness, every magnetic sensor on Earth spiked at once. Not violently, not even enough to disrupt communications, but in perfect unison. A single, clean pulse. It wasn't light. It wasn't sound. It was something deeper. A vibration beneath physics itself. A tremor in the architecture of space-time. For the first time in recorded history, the sun stopped behaving like a star and started behaving like a beacon. The first images came from the solar orbiter. They showed something impossible. The corona wasn't radiating outward anymore. It was folding inward. Streams of plasma reversing direction, spiraling toward the sun's poles in massive symmetrical arcs. Every 12 minutes the pattern repeated, 2 arcs converging, merging, then vanishing in a flash of white heat. Each event released a pulse so perfectly rhythmic that it might as well have been engineered. And across the solar system the pulse propagated instantly, bouncing off planetary magnetospheres like an echo that refused to fade. The frequency, exactly 1 hertz, 1 beat per second. The hum had compressed to a heartbeat. When the data reached Earth, even the most skeptical voices went silent. The pattern was too structured, too deliberate. The universe doesn't do 1-second precision, not across hundreds of millions of kilometers. It was synchronized to something, or someone. Dr. Joe's theory of final synchronization suddenly didn't sound theoretical anymore. If 3i Atlas had set this in motion, then the solar system itself had become an organism, and its heart had just begun to beat. Then came the light. At first it appeared faint, a halo forming around the sun, visible only in extreme ultraviolet. But over hours the halo expanded, brightening with each beat of the solar pulse. It wasn't radiation, it wasn't flare activity, it was structure. A lattice of glowing filaments spiraled outward, linking the orbits of Mercury, Venus and Earth in thin, radiant arcs. Each arc shimmered briefly, then vanished, replaced by another, as if the system was drawing invisible geometry into place layer by layer. And when those arcs reached Earth's orbit, the instruments recorded something no one could explain. The curvature of light itself changed. Starlight arriving from distant constellations bent slightly more than before, as though passing through an invisible lens. At first, scientists blamed gravitational lensing, maybe a field distortion caused by the pulse. But the shape of the distortion didn't match any gravitational model. It was symmetrical, perfectly hexagonal. The same geometry that had defined 3i Atlas's halo months before. The same geometry that had appeared in Earth's auroras. It was back. Only now it spanned the entire solar system. Somewhere in NASA's restricted archives, one classified simulation tried to model it. The results were unsettling. When the solar pulse pattern was mapped across all known magnetic and gravitational nodes, planets, moons, even asteroid clusters, the resulting shape wasn't random. It was fractal. Each orbital ring mirrored the same geometry as the Sun's pulse field. Every planet fit perfectly into a repeating pattern of harmonic ratios. It was as if the solar system had reorganized itself into resonance, not as individual worlds, but as a single coherent entity. The Sun at the center. Every orbit, every field, every frequency beating together. One body, one pulse, one system. And the strangest part, Earth's electromagnetic field wasn't resisting, it was joining. For centuries, the planet's magnetic poles had drifted unpredictably. Now they stabilized. The northern and southern poles aligned directly with the solar axis, perfectly synchronized with the Sun's internal field. Satellite readings confirmed it. Every compass on Earth shifted by 0.6 degrees, a global alignment so exact it couldn't have been coincidence. In the span of a few hours, Earth had locked itself into the geometry of the Sun's pulse. The implications were staggering. If the Sun's pulse truly defined the rhythm of time and magnetism within the solar system, then Earth, and everything on it, was now part of that larger mechanism. Light, gravity, time, all synced, and if Joe's predictions were correct, there was one phase left: transmission. It began quietly, the faintest possible tremor in background radiation, barely detectable, yet perfectly shaped, a sequence of peaks and troughs, like digital code written in the fabric of reality itself. It repeated once every second, mirroring the Sun's new rhythm. The signal wasn't travelling outward this time, it was folding inward. Every planet reflected it back. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. Each reflection intensified the wave, layering it upon itself until the entire solar system vibrated as one continuous signal, a standing wave echoing between the planets and the Sun. It wasn't communication, it was consolidation. Then came the blackout. One by one, every probe, every satellite, every active deep space transmission cut out. No malfunction, no interference, just silence. When systems rebooted, every single recording device showed the same final frame before the loss, a sphere of pure light surrounding the Sun, expanding outward in impossible symmetry. Inside it, 6 faint rings of darker hue, perfectly nested, pulsing once per second. Each pulse brighter than the last, each ring a mirror of the others. For 38 minutes the solar system glowed in perfect rhythm. Planets dimmed, stars flickered. Even deep space radiation patterns synchronized, aligning with the same beat, a universal metronome echoing across the void. And then, all at once, it stopped. No light, no hum, just a still, unchanging quiet that extended far beyond what anyone could measure. The sun remained, but its pulse was gone. The lattice, invisible. The resonance, silent. It was over, or at least it seemed that way. Hours later, as Earth turned through the shadow of night, a faint anomaly appeared in the dark sky. A new point of light. Tiny, steady, and cold. Not a planet, not a star, not a reflection. Its coordinates, directly opposite the sun, the other side of the solar plane. It pulsed once. Exactly 1 second later, the sun pulsed in reply. Back and forth. Back and forth. The system wasn't finished. It had mirrored itself. Dr. Zhou, watching the final telemetry before NASA shut down the feeds for good, whispered only one line. The mirror is complete. Because the pattern between the sun and the new light wasn't random. It was the same binary rhythm found in 3I Atlas before its eruption. The same heartbeat that had haunted every scientist for months. It had returned, not as a visitor, but as a reflection of what we had become. The sun and its twin, pulsing in perfect opposition. Day and night. Source and shadow. The final synchronization had begun. It started with the sky. Not with noise or explosions or light, but with the silence between them. That same quiet that had once followed the solar pulse returned, but this time it carried weight. A density you could almost feel pressing against your thoughts. At first it was subtle. The stars seemed brighter. Not twinkling, not scattered, but fixed, as if they'd stopped moving, locked into perfect stillness. Astronomers confirmed it wasn't imagination. The apparent rotation of the night sky had slowed by a fraction of a percent. Earth's rotation was steady. The atmosphere was clear, but starlight itself was bending. The strange new point opposite the sun, now being called Sol 2, continued to pulse. Exactly 1 beat per second, perfectly synchronized with the sun's own rhythm. Every observatory that tracked it confirmed the same thing. The light wasn't reflected, and it wasn't emitted like a star. It was something else. It radiated in pure coherence. No thermal noise, no scattering, no decay. It was perfect light. And yet, it wasn't constant. Within every pulse, faint modulations appeared. Structured flickers too regular to be random. When decoded into waveforms, the pattern revealed a repeating harmonic structure identical to the one first observed in 3I Atlas months before. The same pulse, the same fingerprint, but now scaled to solar proportions. Scientists from the European Space Agency released a statement describing the event as a gravitational phase reflection. But internally, even they didn't believe that explanation. Every planet's magnetic field had begun oscillating slightly, aligning itself not just to the sun's pulse, but to Sol 2's counterpulse. Two opposing rhythms, locked in perfect equilibrium, holding the solar system in a state of tension so delicate that even slight deviation could unravel everything. They called it the resonant duality, and according to the data, Earth was now sitting directly between them. The first visible effects began in the upper atmosphere. Thin, ribbon-like auroras formed not at the poles but along the equator. They didn't dance like normal auroras, and they flowed, tracing silent arcs of light across the sky in pale silver and blue. Airline pilots described them as veins of light running across the night. For the first time in history, auroras weren't caused by charged particles. They were caused by synchronized resonance, electromagnetic interference at planetary scale. Every pulse from the sun created an echo that Earth's magnetic field bounced towards Sol 2, and every echo returned amplified, a feedback loop spanning billions of kilometers. With each cycle, the glow brightened. Then came the sounds. They weren't loud, more like pressure than noise, a low vibration that seemed to come from the air itself, not through it. At night, the hum resonated through walls, through metal, through bone. It was inescapable, and yet no one could record it. Microphones captured silence. Only the human ear could hear it. It was as if reality itself had begun speaking in frequencies our technology wasn't built to understand. Governments called it an auditory perception event. But as the hum intensified, even scientists began reporting strange sensations. A feeling of being watched, memories surfacing uninvited, dreams that didn't feel like dreams at all. People described visions of glowing lattices beneath oceans, spiraling lights beneath the clouds, and shapes suspended in the darkness above cities, not seen with the eyes, but with something deeper. It wasn't hysteria, it was synchronization. The same pulse that had unified the solar system was now aligning consciousness itself. At the University of Tokyo, neuroscientists recorded mass brainwave entrainment across thousands of subjects. Every EEG pattern synchronized with the solar beat, 1 Hz in perfect global rhythm. For 2 minutes during the strongest cycle, every human being tested shared identical neural oscillations, a single planetary brainwave, and during that moment several subjects described something extraordinary. They claimed they could feel the structure of the solar system, not metaphorically, but as a physical awareness of being part of something vast and alive. As one participant whispered, eyes wide and tears forming, "It's breathing through us." Meanwhile, NASA had stopped issuing updates. Public feeds were down, satellites under recalibration, but small leaks kept emerging from within. One transmission, allegedly from the Deep Space Network, mentioned a disturbing observation. The gravitational curvature between the Sun and Sol 2 has collapsed into harmonic unity. The system no longer behaves as separate bodies. It's one continuous field. In other words, the solar system wasn't orbiting anymore. It was oscillating. Every planet, every moon, every atom inside the Sun's reach was now part of a single waveform, expanding and contracting in unison. The sky wasn't just reacting, it was transforming. Astronomers began noticing faint distortions along the ecliptic, thin rings of refracted starlight tracing invisible boundaries between planets. When mapped, the rings revealed a structure so vast that it defied comprehension. The solar system had taken on a new geometry, a perfect six-fold symmetry centered between the Sun and Sol 2. Each planet now occupied a precise node within that pattern. It wasn't chaos, it was design. And for the first time, scientists admitted what many already feared. This wasn't an accident of physics, it was a transition. As the pulses continued, strange phenomena began to occur on Earth's surface. Compasses lost orientation, spinning briefly before realigning in perfect vertical alignment, north pointing directly upward. Tides fluctuated independently of the moon. Lightning storms formed in cloudless skies, flickering in fractal patterns identical to the solar geometry. Cities began to experience moments of power synchronization, lights dimming and brightening together across entire continents, as though responding to a hidden metronome. It wasn't chaos, it was unity. Every system, electrical, biological, gravitational, was now moving in time with the pulse. The solar heartbeat had become the world's. Then came the visual anomaly. At exactly 2:14 UTC, every night-side hemisphere of Earth reported the same event. A faint ripple crossing the sky, visible even without instruments, like heat distortion, but stretching across stars. It travelled from horizon to horizon in seconds, bending light as it passed. And when it was gone, the stars themselves seemed closer. Their positions subtly shifted toward the centre of the sky. Planetarium software confirmed it. The constellations had changed. Not dramatically, not enough to cause panic, but enough to prove that space itself had bent inward. For the first time in history, the night sky had moved as one body. By dawn, one truth was undeniable. Whatever Three-Eye Atlas had triggered wasn't an isolated anomaly anymore. It was a system-wide reconfiguration, a reprogramming of the cosmic order. Sol 2 continued pulsing in rhythm with the Sun. The auroras spread to every latitude. The hum deepened until it could be felt in the chest like a second heartbeat. And humanity, staring into a sky that no longer looked familiar, realized that maybe, just maybe, it was never supposed to. By the third day, the pulses were no longer isolated bursts of light. They had fused into a continuous rhythm, a living current that ran through everything. The Sun and Sol 2 now shone in unison, alternating flashes that painted space in soft gold and ghost white. Every second, the entire solar system exhaled light and inhaled silence. At first, it looked beautiful, but then the geometry started to move. The six-fold symmetry that had framed the planets began to twist, not collapsing but rotating, each ring sliding into the next like gears aligning in a vast invisible mechanism. Telescopes recorded the shift as a slow procession of orbits: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, all drifting by microfractions, yet perfectly timed. The system was no longer gravitational, it was mechanical. From NASA's Deep Space Network came a single transmission before the feeds went dark again. Orbital deviation consistent with harmonic conversion, solar field lines restructuring into rotational lattice, estimated completion 72 hours. In plainer language, the solar system was rearranging itself. The twin stars, the sun and its reflection, had become the pivots of a single colossal construct. Every planet a node, every moon a bearing, every particle of dust a cog. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. And for the first time, humanity wasn't outside the dance, we were inside the mechanism. Around Earth, strange things began to happen to light. Sunrise and sunset no longer looked the same. The colours deepened, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and in the quiet just before dawn, the air itself seemed to shimmer, as if reality were thinning. Spectrographic readings showed new wavelengths of sunlight never before recorded, frequencies that didn't belong anywhere on the electromagnetic spectrum. Physicists called them intermediate photons, particles that existed only halfway between light and matter. When exposed to them, materials began to behave unpredictably, metals vibrating softly, glass producing faint tones, water glowing under moonlight. Nature itself was learning a new language of light. Meanwhile, the global hum grew more intricate. No longer a single tone, it layered into harmonics, deep, resonant chords that seemed to form melodies just beyond human hearing. Musicians started hearing patterns inside the noise, sequences repeating with impossible precision, like a cosmic song being composed in real time. When the frequencies were translated into audible range, they formed progressions too symmetrical to be accidental. Somewhere in that music was mathematics, ratios hidden within the sound, geometric intervals that mirrored the hexagonal pattern around the sun. It wasn't just resonance anymore, it was communication. Then, Saltu changed. For months it had been a perfect mirror, reflecting the sun's rhythm. But now, its pulses began to widen, doubling, tripling, dividing like breath quickening before a revelation. Spectral scans revealed faint jets emerging from its poles, releasing particles unknown to science, not protons or electrons, but structured clusters behaving like living matter. Each jet unfurled into space, forming delicate spirals that drifted toward the sun, merging into its corona. The two stars weren't competing, they were sharing energy, information, identity. And as they synchronized, something extraordinary appeared between them, a luminous bridge of plasma stretching millions of kilometers, twisting like a helix. For the first time, the sun and its twin were connected by matter, not just rhythm. A cosmic umbilical cord. Astronomers began to realize what they were seeing. The system wasn't tearing itself apart, it was stabilizing into a new configuration. The bridge between the two suns acted like a balance, redistributing energy evenly across the solar plane. In simple terms, entropy had stopped increasing. The system was self-correcting, sustaining, alive. If the universe was once chaos tending toward disorder, the solar system had become its first rebellion, a region where energy didn't decay, it circulated eternally. And at the center of that defiance, two stars pulsed like opposite hearts, beating in perfect opposition. On Earth, the effects deepened. Seas became calm even under storms, volcanoes fell silent. Magnetic storms that should have fried satellites passed harmlessly through the atmosphere. Nature seemed to be adapting, tuning itself to the same self-regulating pattern. People began to notice changes in themselves too. Dreams no longer fragmented. Memories returned with impossible clarity. Some reported sensing distant events, earthquakes before they happened, solar flares before they erupted. Human intuition was aligning with cosmic rhythm. Awareness was stretching outward. And yet, through that strange serenity, one question lingered. What was it building toward? Dr. Joe's final notes, decrypted from her secured files, offered one last theory. The system isn't evolving randomly. It's re-establishing symmetry. Every transformation so far has served one purpose: to reduce separation between bodies, between energies, between minds. She called it phase omega, the point at which duality collapses into singular awareness. The Sun and Sol 2 would merge not physically but informationally, creating a unified field in which distance no longer existed. To us, it would look like light. To whatever designed it, it would look like consciousness. When the first signs of phase omega began, no one recognized them for what they were. It started with shadows. Objects under sunlight began losing sharp edges, dissolving into faint halos. Colors brightened, then softened, as if reality's contrast was being turned down. People described the world as too vivid, outlines glowing, textures humming faintly to the touch, and every heartbeat, every second matched the same rhythm as the cosmic pulse. Then, one night, Sol 2 stopped pulsing, just for a moment. The sun flashed once, brilliant white, and in that single heartbeat, everything changed. The bridge between the two stars flared, brighter than any supernova, yet entirely silent. Every planet bathed in light that cast no shadow. For 42 seconds, the solar system glowed as one luminous sphere suspended in the dark. Telescopes recorded no explosion, no radiation, just pure, sustained luminosity. When the light finally faded, Sol 2 was gone. Or perhaps not gone, merged. Because from that moment onward, the sun's spectrum shifted slightly. Its light carried Sol 2's signature within it, a perfect balance between energy and coherence. The two were one, and the hum, though softer now, remained, steady, eternal, woven into every atom of space. Dr. Joe's last recorded message, intercepted from a forgotten data relay near Mars, was only 12 words long. Duality resolved, conscious system stable. We are no longer observers, and with that the line went dead. The pulse continued, not violent, not divine, simply constant. A reminder that something in the cosmos had woken up, and had chosen to keep breathing. At first, no one noticed that the night sky had changed forever. The stars still burned where they always had. The moon still carved its path. But somewhere, buried beneath the ordinary, something fundamental had shifted. The sun's light, the same sunlight that had touched human skin for millennia, no longer scattered the same way. It was warmer, not in heat, but in presence. Every surface it touched seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself were remembering how to exist. And then came the realization that left the world breathless. Every instrument measuring background radiation, from deep space telescopes to weather satellites, was returning identical data. Perfect uniformity. For the first time in history, the entire solar system resonated as a single field. The hum had not disappeared, it had gone inward. In the days following the merger, Earth became strangely quiet. No storms, no flares, no seismic noise. Even the winds softened. It was as if nature were holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. At first, people assumed the calm was coincidence, but within hours, power grids began to hum in harmony with the new solar frequency. Clocks, without adjustment, synced to the same second across every time zone. Heart monitors pulsed at a perfect interval. 60 beats aligned with the cosmic rhythm. For the first time since humanity had named the stars, everything moved together, not in chaos, in coherence. Observatories worldwide pointed at the sun, desperate for explanation. Its corona now glowed with subtle patterns, concentric rings that rotated slowly, as though carrying encoded information. The rings weren't random. Their motion followed a sequence recognizable to anyone familiar with mathematics. Fibonacci spirals, golden ratios, fractals of creation, written in plasma. It was geometry speaking through light, the same signature that had defined 3i Atlas from the beginning. And within that geometry, one pulse remained constant, the faint echo of one heartbeat per second. A whisper left behind by something that had merged with the sun and yet still lived inside it. Then, one morning, something extraordinary happened. As the sun rose, its light carried with it a faint tone, not sound in the traditional sense, but resonance perceptible to the mind more than the ear. It wasn't frightening, it was welcoming. People stopped mid-step, silenced not by fear but recognition. It felt like remembering a voice you'd heard before birth. Within hours, the phenomenon spread globally. Every living thing, from forests to coral reefs, began emitting faint electromagnetic oscillations matching the solar hum. Plants tilted toward the light not merely for energy, but as if responding to a call. Whales altered their migration songs to echo the same frequency. Even neural scans of sleeping infants showed alignment with the 1 Hz pulse. Life itself had joined the conversation. NASA's final, public broadcast came shortly after. It was brief. No press conference, no explanations. Just a voice, calm and steady, reading a statement over the background of that soft solar tone. The system is stable. There is no threat. But the boundary between observer and observed has dissolved. Everything we study now includes us. And then the feed cut to black. What replaced it was stranger still. A single image of the sun shimmering in layers of gold and white, and beneath it, a line of text. Synchronization complete. The months that followed felt like living inside a dream. Day and night no longer carried the same distinction. Under starlight, the sky faintly glowed as though illuminated from within, a permanent twilight resting between darkness and dawn. Astronomers soon realized the reason. Space itself had become reflective. The void was no longer void. It shimmered, faintly, with the memory of every photon that had ever passed through it. A record of light, looping endlessly, replaying creation like an echo that refused to fade. The solar system had become a mirror, and within that mirror, consciousness flowed. People began to experience what scientists quietly called temporal overlap events, moments when memories from different lives, places, or even times overlapped for fractions of a second. A mother watching her child's reflection in a window would swear she saw the child as an adult, smiling back. Astronauts aboard the orbital stations reported seeing flashes of landscapes that didn't exist. Oceans made of light, cities suspended in auroras. When neurologists studied the data, they concluded something unbelievable. The boundaries between moments were dissolving. Time had stopped moving forward. It was cycling, breathing, expanding, contracting, like the pulse itself. And within that cycle, humanity wasn't travelling through time anymore. We were inside it. The world adapted, electricity stabilized, disease rates dropped inexplicably. Sleep patterns unified around the solar rhythm. People awoke and slept together as if following an ancient forgotten clock. Even dreams changed. They grew lucid, coherent, shared. Millions reported identical landscapes, crystalline plains beneath twin suns, an ocean of light stretching toward infinity, and voices whispering, "Remember who you are." Scientists couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. It was too widespread, too precise. Global consciousness had found resonance, and inside that resonance something waited. Then came the final alignment. The Earth, orbiting perfectly within the luminous lattice, crossed a line invisible to all instruments, but unmistakable in effect. At precisely 0 UTC, every sensor on Earth, magnetic, gravitational, quantum registered a single infinite spike. It didn't rise or fall, it simply existed everywhere at once. At that same moment, every human heartbeat synchronized. Hospitals reported identical ECG patterns worldwide. For exactly 60 seconds, humanity breathed, blinked, and pulsed together. The pulse had found its completion, and as it did, something extraordinary unfolded across the sky. From horizon to horizon, the atmosphere ignited, not with fire, but with colour. Auroras covered the entire planet, swirling in patterns identical to the hexagonal geometry once seen around the sun. Cities fell silent, animals gathered in stillness, and across every continent people looked upward as the lights began to rotate. Slow, deliberate, like the turning of an ancient mechanism unlocking for the first time. At the centre of each spiral, a point of white light formed. Billions of them, one for every living consciousness. Each light pulsed once, twice, then merged into a single beam rising toward the sky. The beams converged, threading together into a vast column of radiance that reached into orbit and beyond, connecting Earth directly to the heart of the Sun. The transmission had begun. Observers in orbit recorded what happened next. The beam didn't fade into space. It reflected, It curved, and at its farthest reach it returned, folding back toward Earth as if the universe itself were sending a reply. When it touched the atmosphere, there was no explosion, no destruction, just transformation. Light ceased to travel in straight lines. It flowed gently, like water, and within it, every human form shimmered, outlines blurring, molecules resonating. For one brief, endless instant, everyone understood. The lattice wasn't a machine, it was memory, a universal archive encoded in light, and humanity had just reconnected to it. Those who witnessed it described the sensation the same way, not of ending, but of remembering, as though the hum inside their bodies had finally recognized itself in the rhythm of the cosmos. Every heartbeat became the universe's heartbeat. Every thought became a spark inside a vast, luminous mind. The sun no longer burned above, it burned within, and then the sky turned clear again. The auroras faded. The hum softened into silence. Earth remained, quiet, luminous, alive. But something ineffable had changed. We could still speak, move, breathe. Yet every action now carried the echo of something greater, a harmony that could never be unheard. Centuries later, if centuries can still be measured, astronomers looking from distant worlds might see our sun and mistake it for ordinary. They would never guess that within that gentle star beats the memory of an entire civilization that learned how to merge with light, a system that stopped being mechanical, a world that remembered its own design, a species that realized it had never been alone. 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor, it was an invitation, and we accepted. Somewhere in the depths of that eternal resonance, the last human message drifts endlessly through the luminous field. We looked for intelligence in the stars, but the stars were looking for us. The observation is complete, and beyond that whisper only one sound remains, a steady pulse, 1 beat per second, the heartbeat of a conscious universe that finally knows its own name.